It's got a weird glitch. I'm gonna try it one more time. Oh. Well, this would imply that we are okay. All right. I think we're okay. David, take it away.
All right, thank you, Gretchen. Well, welcome to September's Community Police Review Board meeting. We're going to go around and introduce ourselves. We'll say our name, what ward we're from. My name is David Reinhold. I'm the chair of this committee, and I'm a resident in Polk County, and I'll pass it to Ryan.
Thanks, David. Ryan Shands, resident here in Polk County as well. I live across the bridge in West Salem. And I don't know, I didn't catch, David, if you're talking about background at all, if that's the end of it.
That was the end of it, but if you want to let us know, that's fine.
That's good. I'll go ahead and I will tap Aaron.
I'm Erin, and I also live in Polk County in West Salem. And yeah, and I don't know, whoever wants to go next.
I'll go next. I'm Elizabeth Infante. I live in Marion County. Or are we doing more to the introduction? I'm sorry.
My name is Oni, and I live in Marion County.
I think I'm left. Mal Gregg, live in Salem, Marion County.
You're near last. My name's Grant Yoder.
Oh.
I'm Ward 7, I think. South Salem.
Yes, the
Gretchen,
duo next, so we'll just say hi. I'm Deputy Chief Brandon Ditto, and
I'm Lance Deedy, Lieutenant with the agency.
And Steve, I guess you're up next.
Yeah, I'm Steve Galvin, Sergeant with Professional Standards Unit. And I think I saw Lori, so I'll let Lori go.
I'm Lori Evans. I am an assistant city attorney, and I represent the police, CPRB, and the courts, and I'm general counsel for the city.
Thanks, everybody. And my name is Gretchen Bennett, and I'm a liaison to this board. And I do want to take a second and congratulate Brandon Detto on his promotion to be deputy chief, and also welcome Lieutenant Deedy back into the CPRB community. Good to see everybody.
Oh, I didn't know that. Congratulations, Brandon.
Hey, thank you.
Congratulations.
You're a great deputy chief. Yes.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Okay, next on our agenda would be approval of our last minutes.
I move to approve.
Is there a second?
I second.
It's been moved and approved to accept our last meeting's minutes. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Motion carries. Gretchen, are there any public comments?
I've received none.
Okay. And it looks like there's no request for hearings. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And so I guess now we're at our use of force annual report. So we'll turn it over to Salem PD.
All right, thank you. So this will be me tonight, since this is Lieutenant Deedy's first meeting back. I told him I would cover down on this as he's kind of getting spun up on some of the activities of the section. So I'm going to try to share my screen here, and just let me know if there are any issues. You cannot see it, so hold on one second. How did that work?
Yes, we can see.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so what you're looking at here is our annual use of force report. This comes out in just the beginning of the second quarter of the calendar year. So you can find this on our website, which is, I guess I should say, our transparency portal portion of our website. So if you go to yoursalempd.com, there's a number of documents on there, from assessments to our annual pursuit report, our annual use of force report, and other documents there about our body cam program, policies, things like that. So that's all open to the public. So this came out in April. It takes us typically the first few months of the year to compile all the data and sort through everything. And once we're sure we captured everything, then we publish our report. This is the first one that we've published that has been on our transparency portal, and it's been open to the public. So it was pretty exciting for us to be able to show that. So it is a PDF document. So I'm going to be scrolling down, and I'll kind of explain as we go here. Excuse me. If you go to the report, this is all hyperlinked. So you're looking at the table of contents. It goes through a number of items, and we'll glance through all these items. So I don't need to go too much into the table of contents, but I'll just show you as you can click through. If you're on the website, you'll be able to click to each section that you want. The first portion is our background portion. And essentially that goes over a couple different items of note. So one item is our accreditation. We are an accredited agency, and we have been for the last 16 years. So we were formerly accredited with CALIA, which is more of a national organization. And we're currently accredited with the Oregon Accreditation Alliance. So that's every 3 years. We ensure they do a deep dive through our policies, but not only that, but also our practices, our training. They have to validate and verify that we are adhering to our policies. So they look for proofs of every item, and they do that review every 3 years for us to receive our accreditation certificate again. And we've successfully completed that every year since 2007. Also on this, it does define a couple things. It talks about what physical force or use of force is. So physical force for us is anything above unresisted handcuffing. So if we were to place somebody into handcuffs to effect an arrest and there was no resistance, that would not be considered a use of force and wouldn't be documented as such. So when we start looking at the numbers of how many use of force incidents, it's anything greater than that. So for another example is if we are placing somebody into handcuffs and they start to pull away from us and we have to use some sort of physical force at all to pull their hands together to put them into handcuffs, that would be considered a use of force. And then anything above that, which there's a couple examples of taser use, any kind of strikes, control holds, other physical strength or countermeasures, those would all be considered use of force. But anything above unresisted handcuffing is captured and documented as a use of force incident. So as I scroll down here, the next page you come to is our City of Salem community description, and that's the demographics. And this is taken directly from the U.S. Census. So the American Community Survey is the survey completed by the Census Bureau. And as you can see, we retrieved this information about the Salem area in February of 2022. So that was as current as we had there directly from the Census Bureau. The next section here is our year-to-year comparisons. So although we didn't have published reports, we have been completing use of force annual reports for a number of years. And so we have been capturing this data. So what you're looking at is if you look at table 1 there, the use of force incidents by year, we cover the last 3 years and we take a 3-year average. And we then compare the last year, so the year 2022, which this report is on, we compare that with our 3-year average to see what our trends actually are. As you can imagine, year to year, it can go up, down, and we can see spikes. So this gives us a better idea of where it's actually trending, whether it's whatever data we're trying to capture. As you can see there, it's use of force incidents. Then as you go down the column, it goes to case numbers assigned. So what that means is if we have a call for service and there is any kind of police action taken where a report is taken, we would assign a case number to that. And that would be part of the investigation. So that's how many case numbers we assigned. Any use of force incident requires that a case number is assigned. So that's also why you would pull a case number as well. And then as you scroll down a little bit further, it's got arrests. is the next block down, and that shows how many arrests we had for the entirety of the year. And then total calls for service. So that's all calls that came into the police department. And then that last column's our 3-year average for that. So as you can imagine, some of our calls we can quickly clear off, or may not even require a call back to the person who is calling in. It may say, hey, I was driving down the highway and I saw somebody who may be impaired while they're driving. I don't need a call back, but please, if there's an officer in the area, can you check it out? So it could be something like that. And then if an officer does respond and takes action, that would assign a case number. And that's when it would come back to this column. So although we had 114,000 calls for service, for officers getting involved to an investigative degree, that happened about 29,000 times. And if you guys have questions as we go, some of it, it may explain itself as you get a little farther down the report, but if you have questions, feel free to ask.
I have a quick question. Why
yes.
did arrests go down in 2022? It looks like it went down 6,352. I guess just trying to understand.
I don't know. Hang on a sec here. I don't know if I drew on that or if
2022.
I did accidentally. I don't even know how I did it. I'm so sorry.
sorry.
I was
like,
trying
if I
to
did that, I'm
calculate.
sorry. I didn't know how I did that.
No, it says everybody will see it. I don't even know I could do that. I'm so sorry. I was trying to calculate percentages. Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Do you want me to share and then reshare? Maybe that'll clear
No,
it.
I'll try. I'll see if I can delete it. There's a.
If you just go down, look
erase it.
at the
there's an
left-hand
erase.
side of your
I'm
screen.
fixing it. I fixed it.
Okay.
There we go. Okay, I'm sorry, Elizabeth. What was your question?
So it looks like the level of arrest for 2022, 6,352 it's not significant, but it still went down from 2021.
Mm-hmm.
Is that because the ability to charge people or arrest people, or what's that difference?
This report doesn't specifically take a deep dive on the types or on how many arrests and why. So I don't know if I could answer that with the data from this report. That might take a more in-depth look just on arrests.
Okay.
So we just took the raw numbers there for kind of a comparative analytics in general.
Okay.
I have a question. You're probably looking at it too, Brandon, but so it's not the case numbers assigned or calls for service, but probably this use of force is happening in arrests, correct?
Yes. So
it's about 10% in 2022 had some sort of use of force, and it could be minor to a little more serious.
Yes. So that's correct. So
okay.
For actual arrests that occurred, approximately 10% had some sort of force applied. And again, that's anything other than, that's just even any kind of physical strength that you have to exert when somebody's just not completely compliant into handcuffs.
And it is only physical, right? Not like verbal escalation of ordering louder or whatever. That doesn't count as use of force.
No mere presence or just an argument or anything like that. It would have to be some sort of physical action.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question as
Yes.
well. So calls of service trends are up, arrests are down, and use of force is down. Is that a normal trend?
No, I wouldn't say that's a normal trend based on what I've looked at over the years. I think we had a concerted focus on different types of tactics. We definitely in 2019 and 2020, our heavy focus was on de-escalation. In our training cadres, we continued that focus in 21 and 22 with what we call ICAT, which is our integrating communication assessment and tactics. So it was definitely a more holistic look at how to resolve situations. And so I think that would explain a lot of the trends based on what we saw from our training cadres and the feedback we were receiving. And yeah,
Okay,
and there,
great.
I would say, yeah, the changes to drug laws as well, definitely changed the number of arrests that were made. There was a number of drug arrests that occurred in the other years prior to a drug law change. So I would say that would have some effect just on its face. And I'm sorry, I didn't. I had one alibi on the force. If we do point a taser, a firearm, or something like that, although there's no physical connection with the person, that would be a documented use of force. So although like a verbal altercation or something would not be, the mere pointing of any kind of weapon at someone, we would have to document that as a use of force. So these are just some graphical depictions of the tables. So it's essentially the same numbers that you've already seen there. But I'm just going to kind of scroll through that as we can keep moving forward there. That brings us to table 2, which is the use of force complaints by year. We did talk about complaints in a previous meeting, and we had some different statistics on that. When I say different, I don't mean different numbers. I just mean a more robust look at the complaints and types of complaints and things like that. What you're looking at here is fairly narrow because this is use of force complaints against officers. So as you can see in 2020, we had 775 incidents. We had 5 citizen complaints about use of force, and then 1 internal complaint from someone within the agency against another officer. 2021, we had 2 complaints, 3 internal complaints. And then 2022, we had 1 citizen complaint of use of force. So although we may have other complaints that come in throughout the year, and we do, these ones were strictly focused on use of force complaints. So scrolling down a little bit more, table 3, this is multiple uses of force. We also track this multiple force used on a single incident. So you may have one incident where multiple officers are using physical strength. One officer may use a taser. They all have to document their use of force as well. So, or you have multiple people in one incident that force is used on. Say you had 2 to 3 suspects. That would generate multiple use of force reports because you would have use of force report written on each individual. So anybody who force is used on, it has to describe the details of that force and the types of force used as part of not only the narrative, but then we have a full data collection report that we have as well, which is more of a checkbox form. And that's where we gather a lot of this data and we compare it with the narrative to ensure consistency. Again, there's another graph below that just depicts the same thing, but it's a different visual look at it other than the table.
Deputy Chief, can I ask you something? This is Mel again. Just as a reminder, the difference between unfounded and exonerated.
Yes. So exonerated would mean that the action that was alleged did occur, but although it occurred, it was within our policy. So someone might say, oh, this person used force. They grabbed me, my arms behind my back, put me in an arm and shoulder lock, and then put me in handcuffs. And they say that that was completely improper and outside of your policy. When the investigation shows that it was within our policy to use that level of force and to use those techniques, that would be the result of that would be exonerated. Unfounded would mean that there was no factual basis for the allegation whatsoever. So someone said that an officer punched him in the face, and then we investigated. There was witnesses or now body cam footage or something like that, and we show that that is just completely false. Then that would be one that could be unfounded, but it has to be as overwhelmingly false.
Thank you.
Quick question before we move on. Is there any connection to the level of the offense that originally got the officer out there that led to a use of force?
So That gets us more down to the review section. Maybe if I can hold that question, I can talk about it a little bit more depth as we go down. Is that all right?
Absolutely.
Okay. Let's see here. So incident reports per individual subject. This is how many use of force incidents a subject has in the community. So you might have one person who officers have used force on multiple times in a year based on multiple interactions. And that's what's depicted here. So here you had one person in 2021. I don't know if you guys can see my cursor here. Are you able to see that? There's one person in 2021 that had 8 incidents that involved some level of force with officers. And again, I'll talk about some of that, how our review process is as I get down to that section of how these are all reviewed to make sure that people aren't targeted specifically within the community. So that gets down to here. So instant review. So we have a multi-tier review process. So we have what's called the Applied Tactics Review Board, and that's made up of 4 officers and 4 sergeants in the department. And they are instructors in multiple disciplines, from firearms to taser to our defensive tactics, to our emergency vehicle operations, to our canine officers as well that are involved in that. So each week, the officers from that board, at least one sergeant and one officer, review all use of force incidents within the department. Additionally, if there's any use of force incidents that reach a certain level, and I believe that's on paragraph 1 there, it talks about a supervisor after action review, and that would be something if there was 3 or more taser cycles used. So somebody shoots a subject with a taser and they pull the trigger multiple times to try to control them, that would trigger a supervisor after action review. Also canine bites, anytime that a canine is released to bite and hold a subject, that would trigger an after action review. And that's kind of a second tier review process that not only our weekly board reviews that, but now the deputy chief of the involved, who is overseeing that division, will also review that in detail. If there's still concerns after the board looks at it, or after the deputy chief looks at it, or after anybody looks at it, frankly, that can go to our internal affairs or professional standards unit. And that's one that Sergeant Galvin there would be doing a more detailed investigation on. So for that, he'll bring in subject matter experts. He'll interview all witnesses. He'll collect any evidence that's possible and conduct a full, thorough investigation on that. And then we have a final tier, which is our critical incident review board. And that is reserved for major use of force incidents, typically that fall under our Senate Bill 111. And in paragraph 4 there, it talks about Senate Bill 111 protocols. But if there's ever an intentional use of deadly physical force or an in-custody death involving any of our department members, that would trigger the protocol in Senate Bill 111. And then we're doing 3 separate investigations. So we would have a civil investigation by the city attorney's office that's led directly by them. There would be a criminal investigation led by the local district attorney's office. And then there would also be an internal investigation led by our professional standards and training section. So 3 concurrent investigations that don't overlap. They're independent of each other. But those would go in those extreme situations where you have an intentional use of deadly force or an in-custody death, and they would be reviewed by that. And so you may have an officer who would need to get cleared civilly, criminally, and then internally as well, before they're able to come back to service. Did that answer some of the questions about the review process? Or I don't know if I fully addressed what the question was.
Yeah, so there's really 2 questions here. It didn't really address it. Great comprehensive information though, nonetheless, I appreciate it. What I'm curious about though is if in deciding whether or not a use of force applied in a certain case is unfounded, is there any consideration with the original offense committed by the suspect? And what I'm
Yes. So the offense does matter because what we look at is the totality of the circumstances in these incidents, and the type of crime committed is one factor. The level of resistance by the person is another factor. The immediacy of the threat that's being posed is a factor. So all these are looked at in conjunction with the totality of the event. And so some things, when you look at all the totality of those types of portions of the incident, then it may elevate the force level, and that would help to justify that. So it has to be in a reasonable range for that. It doesn't have to be perfect. So like you say that, so the Ninth Circuit, which is the Supreme Court, or the Court of Appeals for our region of the United States, they use 3 levels of force, which would be physical force, which is basically hand-to-hand tactics, control holds, like if you put somebody in an arm bar or like a takedown, you pull them to the ground. That's a lower level of physical force. Then they have an intermediate level of force, which would be the next level up. And that's for things that are typically your tools, like your taser. If you're going to hit somebody with a baton into an impact area, if you had, sometimes you'll see those sponge rounds. We have 40 millimeter sponge rounds that are impact weapons. That would also be an intermediate level of force. OC spray, so like a pepper spray, would also be considered an intermediate level of force. And then you have lethal force at the highest level, and that would be reserved for firearms or any other type of lethal force that occurred. So looking at those tiers, there's a reasonable range, although some person may choose to use a taser, and in a situation where it's appropriate to use a taser, somebody else may choose to use OC spray, but those are both reasonable ranges of force. Now, if that was the only appropriate level of force and somebody's using a firearm, then that would not be an appropriate level of force. Does that make sense there?
If I'm loitering and an officer comes up to me and says, "What are you doing here? Can I have some ID?" And I say, "I don't really want to give you my ID," and it turns into an argument, and they're going to make an arrest because I'm suspicious and I need to be taken in. You know, I'm looking for, can use of force be used in that scenario? And is that compared with if somebody goes into a gas station with a weapon and attempts to knock over the store?
Sure.
And officers show up on the scene. I mean, use of force, I think everybody would say, yeah. But
yeah, so let's say in that first circumstance, you have somebody who's trespassing is kind of what you may be describing. And that would be a lower level crime. It happens frequently throughout the day. If somebody is not cooperating with that and they need to be taken into custody and removed from the property, an officer may try to control them with their hands. Now, if the officer went and pulled out their gun and shot them, I think we could all agree that's completely unreasonable, right? But there may be different tactics that an officer uses in that range of reasonableness that would apply. So one officer may grab hold of them and put them into an arm bar. One officer may draw and just point their taser at them and not use it. Both low levels of force, just a hand control hold, or pointing what's an intermediate level of force at the person, would both be in that range of reasonableness. But yes, force would be, or may be appropriate, I should say, in those circumstances. And again, when you see our use of force trending in that downward direction, we do credit that to taking a lot more time to de-escalate, negotiate, find other ways to resolve situations without using force. And I think over the years, we've prided ourselves on that a lot, but I think it is much more deliberate. I would say in the last probably 4 years of finding alternative methods to get somebody under control without using any physical force.
last question I have before we can move on, in my opinion, from this is, are injuries that are sustained throughout the course of use of force reported as part of this?
Yes, so I cover that. I think it's down near the end of the report. And I can cover that down there. And if you have questions, maybe.
Sounds good.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you.
Let's see. So use of force incidents, there's a, is everybody still seeing my screen here? Like a little glitch on my, okay. Good.
Yeah.
So use of force incidents, a short downward trend line. I generally don't like looking at trends when there's less than 10 data points, but on this there is the 3-point data trend line. So we do have that depicted here. And then as I keep moving down, now it breaks it out by gender. As you can see, males were more likely to be involved in force incidents than females by a pretty high margin, about 4-1 there is what we're looking at. And then it breaks it down by age on the next, table there. As you can see, the levels of who is most likely to be involved in some sort of force encounter with the police. It's people in the age range of 25 to 44 years old. And these age ranges are taken directly from federal guidelines for what they look at for use of force. And so we try to keep the same age ranges, keeping everything consistent with what the FBI looks at when they're reviewing these use of force incidents.
I have a
Deputy Chief,
question.
Yep. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Oni. I keep asking questions. Go to you. Go. I'll ask next.
Well, this is Erin, but I have a question.
Oh, sorry.
It's fine. I was just curious why that age range is. Like, what makes it that age? I don't know. What makes it that age range? Like,
yeah, I think that's there's more likely activity in the adult age range, I guess, in the population. You know, whether it's in the workforce or whether it's interactions or encounters with law enforcement. I think people, as you see, it falls off when they get beyond 45, and they tend to maybe slow down in their as they get a little older. I'm in that age range, so I think I can say I'm getting a little older at that point. And but we've consistently seen, at least is that 25 to 44 age range are more active in both criminal activity and violent crime. So I think by seeing that they're more active in violent crime and criminal activity, they're more likely to have interactions with the police and maybe more likely to have force used against them.
Interesting. Thank you.
My question was, Deputy Chief, since you said you don't like to do, and I understand why, less than 10 data points, are you going to be continuing to present this? Is this only going on since 2020? Why are we looking at only 3 years then?
Yeah, I think we're going to expand beyond that. I'd like to get this up to more data points and just continue the trend out. We went back to 2020. I saw that, so I'll be completely frank about this. I saw there was some problems in the collection with our data in 2019, and I saw some of the similar problems in 2018. So I was a little concerned with the error rate that I was seeing, and I was more comfortable with the data from 2020 and beyond. I don't think it was collected to my standard, and so I think going forward, we'll have all this presented. Obviously, we have it presented 2020 and beyond now, so it's not going anywhere. But I was more comfortable saying that it was accurate and it was comparable, that we could actually gather some useful inferences from it instead of just saying, you know, we have these, and it wasn't wildly skewed at all. It wasn't anything like that. I just wasn't comfortable with how well it was collected, I guess.
That makes perfect sense. Thank you.
I have a question. So you said these are reported through federal guidelines, but are they, I'm trying to figure out where these statistics came from. Are they from Marion County?
Oh, I'm sorry. So what I meant was, so these are our Salem Police Department numbers, only our Salem Police Department numbers. What I meant was the categories, like, because, why are we using 18 to 24 instead of 18 to 28, right? For age range. We chose those age ranges based on what the FBI collects. So we have to report all our use of force to the FBI. And so we kept our age ranges consistent with that, and all the other ranges consistent with how the FBI collects their data.
Okay, that makes sense. I'm surprised. I work with the juveniles here in Marion County, so I'm surprised that 16 to 17 isn't higher.
Yeah, actually, sometimes I am too, but luckily we have been getting more compliance with the lower levels of force, but it's I think we may see some different trends this next year, unfortunately. So we're waiting to see on that, how that shakes out.
Mm-hmm.
Then the next breakdown here is by race of the subject. So we do collect race as best we can. Again, that's how people identify, and so the officers collect that as they can after they make an arrest or use force against someone in those circumstances. So it's got it depicted there in the table, and then again, it's got the graphical depiction there as well. And these are taken the same as you can see up top there. The law enforcement data system, this is the breakdown that they use, as well as the U.S. Census Bureau use this a similar breakdown. So we use those categories.
Do we have the breakdown by race of the arrests to make sense of this? Because it's like 191 was Hispanic of the 615, but what percentage of the 6,000 was Hispanic, to have some meaningful comparison?
Right, that doesn't really compare it well for, let me see here. I don't recall that. No. Let me see here.
To be able to see if there's a disproportionate use of force based on, does that make sense? The percentage of arrests based on race.
Yeah, because we do look at that, and you know what? You're the first person to bring that up, that it's not depicted on our annual report, because we do look at that on a quarterly basis with our trend lines. And because I just did a review on last quarter's numbers where it looked like there was some disparity in a certain segment of the population. So I had one of our sergeants and me as well went through 45 cases in detail just to make sure that these were all wholly justified. And so we did a deep dive. It took us about a month and a half, but we take it very seriously. So
I know
that's not on there.
Okay, maybe.
Guess what, Mel? We're going to see that next year now.
I'm hoping that's what I mean. But it makes more sense, to, like you said, proportionally, to see what it looks like.
Yeah, no, I appreciate
every
that.
step, at every step possible. I mean, from the contacts, the arrests, I mean, we like to, in past positions I've been in, look at the disparity rates across referrals and across diversion and across sentencing, and so yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we have a separate program, our Stop Data program, that tracks the disparity in arrests, and it looks at different categories of, if the contact was under the veil of darkness, where you may not be able to perceive race as well, the search and hit ratio of, like, if you're searching people more often, if they're a certain race, and getting less contraband from them, things like that. So we have a separate program that categorizes that, but yeah, this is not depicted well for that portion. That could do a better comparison of that. So
Deputy
more
Chief,
to come for next year. Thanks for the feedback.
before we move forward, while you're making notes about future reports, one thing that might help too is to have a percentage of whole rather than just the total numbers. So
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that last. Percentage of what?
A percentage of the whole use of forces for these breakdowns instead of just the total number.
Okay.
That could help add some context to what we have a large number of the white, but what is the percentage of the total?
Sure.
Yeah.
Force breakdown. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I think also when it says white, it could fit under the Caucasian category, right? So even when they're booked in Marion County, they sometimes go in under Caucasian, and they're not
Right. Yeah, and that's we try to do our best on that. And again, that's what makes it very difficult in these circumstances. The way the Census Bureau can break it down into Hispanic, because sometimes Hispanic is not a race. It's an ethnicity, as we all know. So sometimes some forms won't accurately capture that, and they'll put Hispanic and white together. But we would like to know if Hispanic and white being separate of how they're treated, if they're treated the same way. So yeah.
Deputy Chief, one more question. I'm sorry. So
Yeah.
I know we're looking at the average, the 3-year average for us, the city of Salem. Are there national statistics to see where we sit with our averages? And not by numbers, because numbers wouldn't make sense. Yeah, numbers wouldn't make sense. More like percentages would make sense, maybe.
Yeah. So the problem that comes with comparing it to other agencies is every agency is a little bit different. And that is even statewide, federally, everybody counts it a little bit different, unfortunately.
Okay.
Although it can be close and you can do some comparisons. I did a breakdown, kind of apples to apples comparison with a larger agency to the north of us, because I saw that we were reported a certain way as having like a higher level of force. When I did a more apples to apples comparison and did a deeper dive, I didn't really see that at all, because people call things by different names. So for example, one example would be when we say someone's arrested, and so if we're comparing use of force incidents with arrests, we say it's because we arrested them for a criminal act and an actual crime. It's an arrest, right? And so that means something to us. Other agencies also say if you're going to take custody for someone on a mental health hold, we don't categorize that the same way, because it would overinflate our arrests and make it look like we made all these arrests, and now we have a lower level of arrest to force ratio, and it doesn't really fit with that. But some agencies say that, well, no, you're taking some sort of custody of them, so that's an arrest. So, but it doesn't give us the same accurate picture, I don't think. But everybody interprets it a little bit different. So unfortunately, there is no national standard for that.
What about NIBRS?
Yeah, NIBRS gives us a standard reporting, and the NIBRS report is fairly consistent. But also, again, with NIBRS, it's federal, and they even call crimes different things. So you could be looking at NIBRS, and it may show something that's not even a crime, that's a crime in Oregon. And so you can't really compare the same thing. We'll say, oh yeah, they were arrested for this. And we're like, oh, that's not even a category federally for an arrest. So we can't even enter it in the system the same way. So there is a little problem there. Well, a major
in the simplistic form, the most simple though, is use of force nationally pretty much the same, and call for service, maybe just those two basic percentage, for 114,000 calls, you had only 697.
Yeah, I would say, and for the highlighted areas, the major areas, I would say we're very consistent with an agency our size, and from the comparisons I've seen, and I think we looked at maybe 5 different agencies last time that we did this look, and it was all fairly consistent. We were actually below in most areas, like I said. We're below the agencies to the north that we looked at. So yeah, as best as we could on the major portions that we could see wild concerns from, there was nothing like that.
It would be nice someday if we were able to at least get a kind of a finger on the pulse of how well our city is doing compared with others on whatever metrics can be compared. It may not be all of them, but some of them. Sure. I mean, the FBI wouldn't be able to give their reports to Congress, unless they had some consistency in their data through, UCR or NIBRS. So maybe.
Right.
Yeah. I'm with Ryan on that one. Yeah.
Yeah. I think as reasonable people could all agree it seems like it's easy, but when I look at the details, it becomes more challenging, unfortunately, as you look across the spectrum of the country and the different ways this is collected. It's a problem. What we do is, again, each force instance evaluated on that basis of, the more in-depth review of it. And so that's where we see a lot of our value. It's not just on the numbers. We see it on the individual incident that's reviewed. And that's where we see, I guess, either our successes or failures is how we're doing with our training and how well we're using force in dynamic situations. So the numbers are a good indicator. But like I said, we looked at that deep dive and I said, well, the numbers are showing that there might be a problem here. But then we did a deep dive on, over 40 incidents and saw that each one was well justified and good reason that the force was used and not excessive. So you had to look at it to that degree, and that was about a month-long process to go through that.
I have an undergrad in crime analysis, and I did when I was at PSU a huge study in Portland's records from the 80s, and it is extremely hard to grab these statistics to even get graphs because they're not always reported accurately. Is that true?
A lot's changed.
Yeah.
A lot has changed.
And like I said, I
think there's always room for error. So, these are a great overview, but I wouldn't say 100%. Am I wrong in thinking that?
No, there's an error rate for sure in any kind of data reporting. Like I said, the data from 2020 and beyond, I trust well that you're not going to see any swings that were wild. But I think overall across the country, it's, how much of an effort are some agencies putting into documenting this stuff, checking those blocks as they're reporting it? How much oversight and accountability do they have? It's just everybody doing the best they can on those circumstances. So I'll move down here if we don't have any other questions on that. We also capture the behaviors of the subject. So if you can kind of see down on the left side there, if they're agitated, visibly upset, calm, combative, if we have indications of alcohol use, drug use, if they're suicidal, emotionally disturbed, any kind of mental health conditions, things like that are captured. So there could be multiple situations that apply for one incident, and you might have agitated, combative, and alcohol all checked on one incident. So those numbers are not going to just add up to the total amounts of use of force. There could be multiple just for one incident.
How do you decide between drug or alcohol or agitated and visibly upset?
Visibly upset is a much lower level. So we give training to our officers on that. Somebody is just upset, but agitated is more physically aggressive, and then combative is somebody who's actually fighting with you. So agitated might be somebody who is swinging their arms around, making motions and things like that, where somebody else is just facial gestures or screaming obscenities or something like that. And combative is somebody's actually fighting with you. Drug and alcohol is actually fairly obvious most of the time, whether they're intoxicated on alcohol or if there's some sort of narcotics on board. A lot of these situations, you'll end up finding some sort of residue paraphernalia, or they'll admit themselves to what type of substances they've used. So that would be a way to document it as well. Moving down, actions of the subject. Then we have refusing to follow orders, any kind of high risk contact, attempting to flee. It just goes down the line there that you can mark the actions that you're seeing or just prior to the force being used. And then
can I ask something? How would you end up in use of force with no resistance?
So this typically comes when we would have this high risk contact, and we've gone to high risk contact, and we're trying to move away from the no resistance. But essentially, say we have a high risk traffic stop with somebody who's stolen a car. We have indications they may have weapons in the car, things like that. Officers pull it over, And due to the reactionary gap that we have to deal with, we'll draw our weapon and point it at the vehicle. As I mentioned, a use of force would be just pointing your weapon at somebody. So that would be documented as a use of force. But those people might offer no resistance whatsoever. There may
That's
be
true,
multiple
yeah.
people in the car that offer no resistance. They put their hands up, they get out. They might not even know the car is stolen, but we have used force on them and we do document it. So there is
That's
a
true.
place for it.
Yeah, thank you, sorry.
Moving down to subject weapons. This is the categorization of what the officers were confronted with, the types of weapons that people had, from firearms to edge weapons, them using just their feet or hands, or biting officers, all those types of things that are used against the officers. The most common thing is hands and feet. And moving down to physical control, as you can see, it's pretty exhaustive on the data points that we collect as we get down even deeper into this report. But it has multiple different techniques that are used by officers. So then we can track effectiveness as well of the technique. So we have a column there for what was used, the type of force used, and if it was effective. So you may start off using physical force to control somebody. They are able to overpower you, so you have to use a different technique. Now you have to use an arm lock. Maybe they defeat the arm lock as well, so those are not effective. And then you end up using a taser, and that's effective. So that can come up, and then you would have to mark whether each use of force is effective or not.
Can you explain the difference between firearm and handgun?
So firearm used, so I gotta have the little asterisks by those, but basically, one action was a firearm pointed. So firearm used would be pointed, because we actually have this firearm used, handgun, and also firearm discharged down here. Let's see. Oh, handgun would be handgun displayed in that situation, and or pointed. So it's not. We've had this data point on there for quite a while. Our officers know, but it's not as clear. But there's situations where you may just pull your handgun out at what we would call a low ready and not pointing it, and that would be a firearm or a handgun that's displayed while somebody else is maybe pointing a taser at the person and trying to get them to comply. Then you might go to a position where you're pointing the firearm at the person, and then as you go down, you go to the extreme circumstances where an officer actually discharges their firearm, which happened once in 2020, 3 times in 21, and 5 times in 2022.
I'd like to point out that it's this one row right here with firearm discharge that has no difference between the number of instances used and the number found effective.
Right. Yeah. No variation on that. And then moving down, there's a whole section to kind of describe the taser. There's different types of taser use, from a drive stun or a touch stun, where you press the taser against somebody's body and it gives a shock. We also have a spark demo, which we just show the spark going across the front of the taser, and as a way to really de-escalate the situation and have them comply without even applying the taser to them. Pointing it with a laser only, just having the laser on, can be effective in getting someone to comply. And then also a probe deployment, which is actually the one listed at the top there, where you fire the darts at the person and it makes a connection, and it produces a 5-second cycle of energy. So taser use is broken down there as well with our averages. And then again, it has the same numbers within the graph to depict it as well. Let's see. And then moving on, we have canine as well. We do a separate annual canine report that documents canine use in a lot of detail. There's a number of data points collected for there as well on how the canines use, what they're tracking for, what types of crimes. But this is specifically for canine teams when they're used as a force option and not a searching tool, which is their primary use. And their secondary use is to use them as a force option. So it has the number of deployments there and the number of times they actually bit and held a suspect for officers to take them into custody. As you can see, that trended down fairly significantly from 14 bites to 8 bites in 2022. Then we have injuries to the subject as well. So any injuries to the subject are documented as well. You can see it goes from bruise, abrasion. We do have an asterisk next to bite. That's just for bites from a canine. It's not from an officer biting the subject.
I don't need comment. We have very little time, but I just want to point out that the gunshot row seems to correspond with the physical control row for firearm discharged above. And I just find that interesting.
I think I noticed canine bite was equally effective as the gun discharge too, but I may be wrong. It was going too fast there.
Yeah, generally canine bites are highly effective.
Yeah.
Nope, you're right. You're correct, Mel.
Yeah. Cool.
And then we have officer injuries listed down here as well, from bruises to sprains, lacerations to bites from somebody. And then we did have one gunshot wound as well. And then finally, just a brief on just the methodology on how force is categorized, and it briefly talks about canine handlers as well there, since canine is fairly unique. And like I said, we dedicate a whole annual report just to canine use because it is so complex on how we use it. And that's the end of the report. Again, if you go on our transparency portal, you can look at that in more detail, take some more time. If you have questions, you can email myself or Lieutenant Dede, and we can try to address your questions as best we can, or any other questions really. But we're available to you.
Thank
I
you.
tried to drop the link in chat.
Yeah, there's a lot of work and a lot of thought goes to this. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This is Gretchen. Thank you. We've disabled the chat as a city because it isn't visible to people who may be watching on YouTube, but I can certainly send the link in an email to you. And if my memory serves me, it should also have been in the email inviting to tonight's meeting.
Mm-hmm.
That'd be fantastic. Is the data for this report available?
So we're almost functional to put on our transparency portal that will have kind of a choose your own adventure style where you can play with the data a little bit more. We're not quite there yet, but we're very close to having that go live this next year. I think that's more, then you don't even have to ask the question. You can just play with it at home and figure out what you want to look at and what you want to compare.
Yeah.
So that question does come up, Ryan. So we're definitely trying to address that. It's just capacity issues within the department and more systems and programs. We're just trying to do the best we can on it, frankly.
Understood.
Yeah. So yeah, and all this stuff, yoursalempd.com is that transparency portal. It has this and a number of other reports. So if you're really bored and you want to take a nap, you can start digging through all that stuff.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Don't,
Deputy.
don't challenge me. I may do that. Awesome.
Okay, thank you, Deputy Chief Ditto. Gretchen, did you want to make a comment about meeting options before we leave?
Thank you, David. I appreciate that. I wanted to check in since tonight's meeting is really the rescheduled July meeting, and our bylaws contemplate 4 meetings per year. I wondered what's the pleasure of the group. Do you want to have your 4th meeting on October 10th as originally scheduled? Or do you want to punt? I wondered about maybe November 7th or November 28th as options. Of course, we could schedule additional meetings if we get a case review. But just what I wondered about a quick, like maybe how many people would like to just keep that original meeting date of October 10th? I'm seeing a
do
couple
we-
of nods. Yeah,
I just want to know if there's enough time for you guys to prepare another agenda and presentations and all of that. Is it too soon?
I can pause and see what PD would say. I would say we can always walk through the case review process. That's something that I can do and would be prepared to do. But we've also got a couple of potential ideas on topics that you've requested in the past that we're exploring. I don't know, PD, if you'd want to add anything to that.
Oh, you're muted. There,
If the group wants to do it in October, we'll be prepared.
awesome.
And then
Yeah.
maybe it looked like a couple of hands up for October. How many people would say, let's move to November instead?
I can do both.
Okay.
And then,
Oni, are you preferring November? Okay,
I prefer November as well.
okay. Quick show of hands, how many people could do election day, November 7th? Is that a bad idea? I see a lot of hands.
Wait, I cannot do it. Never mind. I thought I could.
PD, is that hard on you?
It can be challenging, just
Yeah.
depending on what's going on in the community. Election
Yeah.
has been a little bit.
Let me withdraw November 7th,
Okay.
November 28th, real quick.
Oh, that's like Thanksgiving week, isn't it following?
Should be following.
Yeah, some people go on vacation.
I'll send a poll out and
That's a good
see
idea.
what maybe November options look like for folks. How about that?
sounds good.
Good.
Thank you
Good.
for giving me that time.
All right.
All right, any other board comments before we adjourn the meeting?
Deputy Chief Ditto, maybe next time we meet, we can chat a little bit about CALIA and OAA and the decision to go with OAA.
Absolutely.
Any other comments?
I'm
Okay,
good.
no other. All right, it sounds